Introduction to FinOps with a particular lens on Azure and Azure costs. We'll talk about who does FinOps in your organization, and then move on to why we think FinOps is important, right? So I'll give you a bit of a background as a whole, and then talk about the FinOps framework and how important visibility is of a cloud spend, and probably finish off with a chat about focus, which is really some standardizations and terminology that we can make use of. So we're going to explain all those. When we put the agenda together, we also were very aware that there's lots of subjects in different directions we go, and we're actually planning a follow-up session on this where we might get to more sort of actionable items and more about how you actually do things, right? But today we thought we'd better start off by explaining what FinOps is and make sure we're all on the same page and the importance of it and what we're seeing in the industry, right? As Asta just mentioned, I will remind you all that this is being recorded. We do that so that we can share that on our website afterwards, and you're more than welcome to come back and share that with other members of your team if they missed it, etc. It is a discussion series format, so we do encourage you, whether that's via the chat or if you want to come off mute and ask us a question. We're here to talk, or you've got some subject matter experts I'm going to introduce in a second. So it's all about what you guys can gain from this and learn. So please do ask questions. They're more than welcome. And of course, we will make sure that all the content, and we've got some resources for you. This one, we've got a lot of resources at the end of the presentation. We'll make sure that they're all sent to you post-event, right? So don't worry about jotting things down or whatever. Asta and the marketing team will send out all that information. Alrighty. So let's do some introductions. I'm Paul here, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of cubesys, and I'll be talking and asking the questions to both Sylvan, who's my co-founder. Want to say hi, Sylvan?
Hi guys, Sylvan, co-founder and CTO.
And more importantly, Rodney. Rodney's really is our subject matter and has volunteered to be a guest on this session. Thank you for joining us, Rodney. Do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, hey everyone. I assume we're probably all in Australia, so good morning, but if you're not, good afternoon. So my name is Rodney Joyce. I'm the managing director of a FinOps product called Cloud Monitor. So we help our customers lower their Azure spend, and we have customers in 31 different countries. And on average, a customer saves around 22% after installing Cloud Monitor. We have a lot of knowledge about how Azure works, and we turn that into recommendations and valuable insights. And today, as Paul said, we're going to focus on FinOps as almost a cloud agnostic framework, and not so much about tooling. So I'm looking forward to the chat. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Rodney, and thanks for being here. What I thought we might do as well, before we really get into the meat of the subject, is just introduce the FinOps Foundation. We're leveraging a lot of their IP that they built up in the framework, and that's a large community, global community that really focuses on this particular subject. So a not-for-profit, and we'll give you all the links. They've got loads and loads of great material and capabilities, training, certifications, all that sort of stuff. In fact, Rodney, you're a certified practitioner, I believe it or not. So you've been through that with the FinOps Foundation, right?
Yeah, actually, Paul, I'm a certified professional, which is like a level 5 paladin. So the FinOps Foundation is an open source, not-for-profit organization. Cloud agnostic, technology agnostic, really about helping people, as they say, advancing the people who manage the value of cloud. And I just want to put it out there that one of the biggest misconceptions with FinOps is that it's all about reducing spend, and that's not the case. So, 10 years ago, we were focusing on reducing cloud spend, but FinOps is more about understanding the business value that you're getting for your dollar. So hopefully in today's session, we're going to give you some background on what the FinOps Foundation is, what the framework is, and how you can use it in your business.
That's a good point, Randy. So as I moved on to that next slide, right, and we sort of defined what FinOps is, it really is about that maximizing that business value and how we do that within the different teams and get visibility across our teams. We're going to be talking about that a lot today, right? And I noticed whenever you look at the FinOps Foundations, it doesn't really cost is not the first word that comes out there, right? And in fact, it isn't on this slide at all. Yet that's really what a lot of us are here for. We want to control costs and things, but I think it's important that we do swivel that lens onto value in the business. It's okay to spend if that spending is understood well and there's a good rationale behind it, right? So it's more about driving the value of cloud and how we use it than it is about just controlling costs. Obviously, cost controls are an element of what we do as part of that process. Do you think that's a fair comment?
I think it's also a fairly tricky process to implement in organization because, as we see online too, it's a cross-functional team issue. It's a bit like DevOps, whereas DevOps was even easier to implement because it was within your technical team, but it was a different way of thinking. And I really see FinOps as a mindset. It's not just tooling you do in IT. It cannot be owned by IT. And that's where this concept of the FinOps team comes out that we'll discuss later. So how do you get your technical staff talking to your finance staff, talking to your business staff without any one of those groups owning that process too much and bossing around the others? So it really needs to come across in a mindset and at an organizational level. And a lot of the FinOps challenges come around educating up and educating down so that everyone's on board with what we're trying to achieve with FinOps.
Yeah, nice comment there. I think baseball bats may well be very useful when we're implementing change and particularly culture change.
I guess what you said, Ronnie, is very important. And if you talk between those teams, it's important to have the same language. And if you look at reporting, for example, to have the same data set and all that kind of stuff, right? Like if you don't have that commonality, it's really hard to have a conversation. And having teams from those different areas, they may as well think differently. So having that framework, as I think, strengthens that and makes that easier to understand.
Yes, definitely. And there's a few different challenges on the road. So there's different terminologies. There's different drivers. Why are people looking at these reports? So in order to understand where the cloud spend is going, you need to have timely reports to make data-driven spending decisions. So, we can increase spending here because when we increase spending there, it generates more income for the business. So that's a smart move. So in that case, spending went up on the cloud because it's a smart move. We know the cost per unit goes down and the cost goes up. So there's time delays in the different data sets you get from the cloud. Some clouds are better than others. There's terminology disconnects. There's the way people think. So engineers are spinning up resources because they're on a sprint plan during development. They've got to meet their agile sprint KPIs. They're not focused on cost. So they say, okay, the Scrum Master says, have we implemented this feature? And it's like, okay, there's a problem. First thing I do is just scale up. Someone else will pay for that. And someone else, after the sprint's finished, will figure out that I scaled it up, but they get past their blocker. Then there's time passes, and sometimes, or if you're lucky, someone notices that the cost spiked because someone scaled something up 6 weeks ago, and they can track that down and find out if it was done on purpose, intentionally, and if it was a good move to do. But it's always like the Wild West. There's no connection between the amount that engineers are spending versus how much business value is coming into the business, and that needs to be brought together so you can account for every dollar.
Yeah, it's important, and that's why there's different people and roles in. But just before I move on from this slide, guys, I was interested in the data-driven part, and I know that's something that's been close to the heart of cubesys for a long time, and we in fact built a product called Cloud Clarity to help with tagging so that we could track what resources are deployed where and start to get some the baseline of that data-driven decisions, because obviously they wrap up into numbers, but if the data underneath it isn't accurate. So we've got a question. Just mute you all while I do that. So just to reiterate on that, right? So obviously each individual resource in Azure needs to be tagged appropriately so it can add up to that data-driven decision that we're going to want to get to, right? So and that was very definitely close to the heart of cubesys, and we had that tag manager. Do you want to make a comment about how we get control of those resources underneath and get to that data-driven baseline, just briefly? And maybe I'll ask you, Sylvan, on your opinion on that.
Yeah,
So so I think good tag hygiene is critical here. So being able to account for every dollar spent, and the way we do that currently is you you assign a name value pair string to every single resource, a tag, which has no semantic value, but later on you can start doing reporting on these tags and start assigning semantic value to them. So if you don't have good tag foundation set up, it's going to be very hard to work out who to allocate those costs to. So I think that's the base foundation on tagging is very important. And Sylvan, I know you guys are experts in tagging, attacking that from the kind of core policy side from Azure side, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's important to maybe make that differentiation between the more IT aligned tags and the more business aligned tags, where I think the business aligned tags are sometimes, so things like maybe if you track that on your resources, things like cost centers or business units or whatever metrics that are more or owners, whatever metrics are more business aligned are usually harder to change and harder to track, and less likely that they're managed by the engineers. So it is really important to keep them up to date and have a tool to be able to do that. At the end of the day, also the visibility and checking that everything is how it should be. There is one bigger problem, that if you have not tagged your resources when they occur cost, that tag can never be added back, at least in Azure. That's how it works. So if you miss that, then these resources, this cost will be untagged forevermore. So you definitely need another tool or another mechanism to spread out that cost. Tags are probably not the only way to do that. And I think it's really important to think about, from a business perspective, what are the metrics that are important to you to slice and dice that cost data. So that's something that we need to know, and that's something that's important to have that common terminology and to have some metrics that are important within the business.
I think, Sylvan, one of the problems, if you don't tag everything possible, because some services in Azure are not currently possible to tag.
That's true.
If you don't tag everything, and finance get this bill, the default bucket that they'll assign it to is IT. So that if anything can't be allocated to a business unit to reclaim that cost and that spend, they'll say, okay, by default, we assume it's an IT cost, and they'll pass it on to the IT manager. So it's in IT's best interests that everything is tagged, so it can be cost allocated to someone else to pay for it, whoever incurred the cost.
Now, I just got a question coming in as well before we move on to the next slide, which is going to really focus on the roles and people. Right? And just to quickly answer your question, Graham, when Sylvan was talking about you can never tag again, of course, you can tag the resource. What we can't do is allocate cost to that tag. So if once what happens in Azure when it's allocating the cost, as a cost is allocated, it writes all the tags next to that cost in the logs, right? And so once that moment's passed, you can't go back and re-tag that later, right? You can tag moving forward and add new tags, but you can't see the historical cost against that particular tag once that's gone past. So tag hygiene is really, really important and something that we should aspire to all the time, keep it up to date.
Paul, on that note, I don't want to talk too much about the product that we build, but we have a solution for that in our product, Cloud Monitor. So, and there's another question from Harris. So basically, if we think about the two places where tagging occurs, it's at the source in Azure, where you want to define your policies and make sure everything's tagged, but you can't change things historically. You can't apply tags to historical costs. But if it gets to the front end and you want to view those and you've still got historical data that's not tagged correctly, our solution lets you define normalized tags, and all the misspellings and case differences and historical costs can be normalized to those tags, so that you, in the UI, you're using the definitive tags that you wish. But that is a third-party solution. That's not part of the Azure portal.
Right, Sean, and not Harris. Picked up on that one. Thank you, sir. Yes, good points there. And they're some of the challenges that we see inside of the Azure environment and why some toolings can be useful. All right, let's change focus a little bit and focus on the people side of things, because FinOps, like DevOps, and a lot of these new ways of doing business is really about people, process, and the data, right? Again, so let's focus a little bit about the people side of things, which is obviously super important, and some of the different roles. And what we're trying to do in FinOps, and is really a big focus of the movement, you'll see from the FinOps Foundation, is defining those roles, getting visibility up to those different roles, and making sure that we're making decisions as a team in some of those. So maybe I'll go to you again, Rodney, and get your opinion on some of those and what you're seeing happening.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got lots of things to say. Yeah. So just shut me up if I talk too much. It really depends on the size of your organization, your maturity levels, your awareness of FinOps. You may be doing some of these things automatically through, the sensible nature of it, without realizing you're actually doing FinOps. But I guess this gives us a framework, a tried and tested framework globally, from the people who are eating and breathing FinOps, the FinOps Foundation. And I want to just stress again, they have no commercial agenda. They just want to make FinOps the de facto operating model for the cloud to handle the challenges that we've had from moving from CapEx costs to OpEx costs, and more on that later. So traditionally, engineers create resources for projects that they're working on. They don't worry too much about the costs. Some time passes and someone gets a bill, and hopefully they can allocate cost to the different people who consume those services, and in turn generate revenue for the company. Now, that's got to change, because engineers have to have a cost lens on, and AWS just called it frugal architecture at the AWS reInvent Summit. So engineers are creating the spend. So there's a saying that every engineering decision is a buying decision, whether or not they realize it. So it's quite funny that the same person who cannot go into a coffee shop with a company credit card and buy a cup of coffee, because they're not allowed to, can spin up a $5,000 Synapse or Databricks cluster. So there's no kind of governance around who can do what. You do not want to stifle innovation and say, okay, we're gonna go back to the CapEx model where there's a pre-approval process up front. And I've worked in government agencies and I've seen this where they do that, and it takes 3 months to get a resource group made. Imagine the cost of that. You've got dev teams and consultants sitting idle, waiting for IT to approve the creation of a resource group or enable a Synapse instance. So you have to remember why we moved to the cloud in the first place. That's to get the rapid application development and innovation of the cloud. We don't want to stifle that by implementing the wrong operating model. So coming back to the personas, what you need to do is you have a central FinOps team, but they're not doing that much. Well, okay, they're not doing things technically. They are educating and driving. They are ambassadors for FinOps. So you need a champion who educates up and down. You want to get all your stakeholders involved in FinOps and see the value of it. But they're not. They are delegating responsibility down to the business units. And in each business unit, you might have different personas as well. So the key kind of 3 areas we have are the technical, the business, and finance, and they all have their different interests. And if you look at this chart we have on the screen, this is defined by the FinOps Foundation. There's kind of subcategories within that. So executives want to understand, is the cloud spend aligning with the strategic interests of the company? We chose cloud for a reason. Is that enabling our strategy? That's all they really care about. They don't care about resource groups and subscriptions. They want to see trends up or down and make sure the right people are accountable. The finance team just want to understand who's going to pay for this. They don't really care what it's for or why. They're just going to say, as long as someone pays for this, we're happy. The engineering team just want to build their great products, and now they have to have this cost lens and build things in a smart, cost-effective way. And the procurement team, their roles changed a bit since the old days. They're no longer doing pre-approval up front, but they still have an interest in what's being spent, where it's being spent, what licenses are being procured. But it's more of an informed phase after the fact, as opposed to the pre-approval.
Thanks, Ronnie. And just where my mind goes to and thinking about some of the people that might be on the call. So we've probably got a very mixed bag, and we usually do at cubesys of very large organizations where you might have that might become a dedicated role, like a Scrum Master type situation or something like that, right? But we've also got much smaller clients where like dedicating somebody to own FinOps and drive, that might be a difficult thing to do. Have you got any advice, or what have you seen your client base doing when you're on that smaller end of the scale? How do you bring these same approaches and structure in when we've probably got a day job as well as doing that? So how would you see us getting started with that?
So I think again, it depends on the maturity level of the organization in terms of IT and in FinOps. In a small company, you're not going to possibly need a dedicated FinOps role. You might enable someone to be a part-time FinOps champion. Now, the word enable is really important, because it's not just, changing your title. You've got to actually give them time, give them resources, empower them, give them authority to make decisions. And that's the difficult part. That's where it needs to come from, slightly higher up.
And then we need that executive sponsorship to achieve that, right, and make sure. So we really do need that top-down buy-in to make a difference with this stuff.
Top-down works the most effectively. So in the organizations we've seen the most successful implementations of FinOps is where the execs hear about it first and then educate down or empower downwards. If you try and come up from the bottom, we were in a government agency about 3 years ago where we actually had the idea for Cloud Monitor, and we were building a data platform, and we saw another subscription where there was $500,000 being spent a year, and we could see that there was just loads of unused things, zombie resources. So we spent 2 weeks and we lowered their costs by 180,000 in 2 weeks. And that we realized this problem was rampant. So we turned that into Cloud Monitor, our IP. But we took the findings with all the proof, and we started knocking on doors in this government agency and saying, hey, do you want us to do this for your subscription? And we couldn't get a response. And our logic, we think at the time, was that because government people are concerned about their budget for next year. If they reduce their budget, they might not get the same amount next year. There was a lot of weird psychology going on, depending on the type of organization and the size. If we'd come from the top and said, you have to be responsible for your cost and lower your budgets by X amount, I think we'd be a lot more successful. So the size of the organization makes a big difference too.
Interesting points, and for this audience to maybe take away is it's really important to get that buy-in and education from the top down, right, to make this stick and be valuable. But I want to pick up on visibility and that comment you made during your description there, where you talked about not being able to get a cup of coffee. So an engineer in an IT department can't take a company card and go and get a cup of coffee. No, generally can't do that, right? Or if he does, he needs to justify it, and he'd have to. And even if we've got that happening at a salesperson who takes out a client for a coffee, they're still got to justify what they're spending on, right? Yet in cloud, these same engineers can go and spend a fortune by just turning on a VM or changing a configuration of a network item or 100 different things, right? And we don't have that visibility in the business, and we don't have that visibility even back to the engineer sometimes, right? They're not clear on what it is they're spending. So I think they're really key points, and maybe that's something we could delve into a little bit more as we look at that and that scalability of cloud and that elasticity and speed to market and all those good things about cloud. How do we then control the costs that are potentially there, right? You can, like I say, you can have an engineer just turn on a VM and up go the costs. And how do we get that visibility, do you think, out there? And that's part of what FinOps is about, right?
Yeah, I think the pace of evolution in cloud is increasing, and I see it as like the big bang. So everything's moving bigger and bigger very quickly, and it's unrealistic to expect individual engineers to stay on top of these things 100%, to be across all the aspects of the cloud at the rate at which it's being developed by a company the size of Microsoft. So this is where the FinOps team, a centralized FinOps team, can take their learning between different teams in a bigger organization, and they can say, we have a pattern for dealing with zombie resources, we have a pattern for dealing with orphan resources, and they can educate the different teams. And then apply, maybe not KPIs, but they can gamify it slightly. They can start driving accountability down to those teams. And then once the engineers start taking action, because that's one of the hardest things to do, is get the engineers to take action. The engineers have had it really good for the last 10 years. They haven't been accountable for their costs. And now suddenly you say, we're going to track your costs. They're not going to receive that well. So you have to introduce that in a slightly, in a cautious way. But getting them to take action on all the noise that they're hearing. So, if you're bombarding them with alerts, cost anomaly alerts, if you're bombarding them with recommendations, Azure portal has a lot of this stuff in it. It's got recommendations, cost anomaly alerts, it's got budgeting. First thing is that a lot of it's turned off by default. So you need to have someone who knows how to configure it for the use case that you're dealing with. But you also want to reduce the amount of noise, because if the moment you send too much noise to someone, we know in Outlook, even if you get too many emails, you just start using Outlook rules and automating it and removing the noise. You don't actually take action. So finding the balance between noise and value is really important. But again, that requires someone to go into the portal. That it's an IT role and configure all these things for the business units, and that's quite a challenge in my opinion.
Yeah, and what we're talking about really, everyone, is all this move from capex to opex models that we hear about a lot, right? And having to then deal with the aftermath of that. So maybe I'll get you to answer the next thing. And what's on my mind for me as a service provider, we at cubesys provide both professional and managed services, right? So we help people manage their cloud, and therefore that we're naturally involved in how much that costs and how to optimize it. Do you want to maybe give us some thoughts of where our thinking's been going with that at cubesys?
Yeah, look, I think it's important to embrace the operating model of the cloud and not see it as risk, right? I think if you use it right, then there's a lot of benefit in having the flexibility of the cloud and turning things on and off at the right time, and making sure that we benefit from the variable pricing model and not see that as a risk. As if you leave things on that shouldn't be on, that obviously costs you money, but equally, like if you need more resources, you can burst those resources and benefit from that, having that available, right? Whereas before you would have had to plan for those spikes, or like if you would have wanted to add a DR service to your solution or make it HA, that was almost impossible for a smaller business. So having that flexibility and adding that business value, again, it's very important. And I think the point you made as well before, like if you do put a solution together, then cost is definitely one of the those variables that we need to look at, because it is a buying decision, right? Whenever you put something together, you do specify what that cost is, and we always need to weigh that up against the benefit.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, because in my team where we're building a product, and I like to think my people understand cost efficiency and they're smart developers. They make mistakes. I make mistakes. We leave a Databricks cluster running or FinOps cluster running, and suddenly we've got a bill. So I think there's also a human element to this, where we're in this framework where we can spin up things easily. We don't want to stop that, but you've got to have a way of tracking it and closing the feedback cycle. So if someone does it, then the next possible moment. So in Azure, the costs are updated every day. I think in the next couple of months, there's talk about certain APIs giving the costs out to hourly level. I think AWS does hourly level, but right now it's every day. So the soonest you'd know about it would be the next day. So the next day, if you left let's say you left a $2,000 cluster running, the next day you would get a notification saying, ideally to the person who did it, because they know whether it should be running or not. If you send it to the wrong person, it's useless. They're just going to go, I have no idea, and I'm not going to take. And
that brings us back. That's why that tagging and stuff of ownership and the developer who deployed it, all important tags to track and keep a handle on, so that we can notify people when we get these sort of alerts, right?
Yeah,
and up the visibility.
And the environment where you are working in is so important, because if you're in production, you have a whole nother level of risk for turning things on or for even just touching it. You don't want to touch production, and no one's going to touch production unless they absolutely need to, nor should they. So if you're in development, you have a slightly different set of criteria and different rules you can implement. So that's also very important, giving the engineer context as to what the problem is, where it is, what it should be doing, what was the change. All of these are kind of things you can do to help the engineers make the decision on whether or not what happened should have happened.
And that's so important to be timely as well, really. I'm smiling because I'm thinking back to probably 3-4 years ago at cubesys, where we had a VM switched on and nobody could remember what it was for, right? And it took us maybe a day or two just to find out why that VM was there, and that was costing us, right? And then we were running it in Azure. So that type of situation, right, is and we're the professionals, right? We bring this to other businesses, right? And we can still make mistakes. So I think raising that level of visibility and timely information to the right person is so critical, right? And that all comes back down to really good management of information at the bottom level, those tags or equivalents, right? And then being able to then have a mechanism to bring that forward.
Yeah. So Paul, on that point about the VM, it is funny, but it is a strategy to say, considering the environment, we're just going to turn off everything, and the people who shout the loudest, we're going to turn off the stuff that we don't know. It hasn't got an owner. The people who shout the loudest, we'll find the owners. They'll come in and say, why did the system go down? Obviously, you have to consider the customer impact and the environment you're on. There's other risks, but it is a strategy. You just turn off things and wait for people to shout, and you'll find the owner very quickly.
Now we've talked about the cloud being decentralized and variable and scalable and things, right? So let's move on to this FinOps framework as a whole and talk about how we get control of this stuff. And we've been touching on this as we go, but this slide I really like to bring everything together and talk about the framework as a whole. But where we should really start is the maturity in the top right hand corner there. And again, Rodney, I might lean on you. We've probably more experience than the rest of us on seeing that in different clients you've seen and how they've taken it on. It's very important not to get too far too soon and trying to solve the world in one sweep. We do need to learn to crawl and then walk before we run. Do you want to make some comments on that and where you see that?
There's a few. So as part of, just going back to that original comment about the FinOps practitioner certification, not the FinOps professional certification. The FinOps framework, the FinOps Foundation offer certifications for your staff. And they teach you about all this kind of stuff with real use cases. It's very, very interesting. But one of the things they point out is this whole crawl, walk, run. So before I get to that in a second, I want to go back to mentioning the framework. There's the domains and capabilities at the bottom. And what they've done is they've grouped the most common concepts inside of FinOps, like optimizing the rate you pay, optimizing the usage, budgeting. They've grouped those together into different categories to make it easy to talk about and understand. So when we talk about maturity, we're talking about not only as a whole organization and your approach to FinOps, your maturity within each of these capabilities. Now, there's no fixed order in which you have to go in. There's no rules that said you have to get to this level in one, get to run in this one before you can move to the next one. And it's a continual iterative process that never ends. FinOps is not the kind of thing you can come in, get a consultant to come and sort it out for you and roll off, and it's going to be okay. It's a continual process. It definitely has a, if you never heard of it, there'll be the low-hanging fruit, and the benefits will be really great, and then it will taper off, and you can even scale down your FinOps team a little bit as you start getting to the run phase of many of the capabilities. But that will take a long time to be on the size of your business and your agility. So the way we approach this is you would first do an assessment, and you would understand where you as an organization fit in all these different capabilities, and what your maturity level is, and you'd work out the appropriate plan to get there.
By the way, everybody, each of those domains that Rodney's talking about, there are assessments available from the FinOps Foundation that you can take online, and we've got that as one of the resources we'll send to you. So you can do a self-assessment on those pieces, and of course we can probably help you with those if you've got questions. But yeah, you're right. So each of those domains has got a particular requirement, and then a different maturity level, and then we bring them all together to give you an overall maturity level of where you're at. And there's some guidance from the foundation as well on what you maybe want to achieve in each of those sort of stages of development, like getting a budget variance within 20%, I think was in the crawl section, for example, right? And then the maturing that and narrowing that down as you get better at the FinOps practice, right?
And I think, Paul, that highlights a very good point. You have to measure before you start this, because obviously cliched. You can't fix what you can't measure. So you've got to measure it and take a benchmark, no matter where you are, and say, this is where we are now. This is our benchmark and our baseline. And then you do things, and hopefully you get that baseline to improve by constantly measuring. And that's how you determine. And the framework will offer KPIs that are common globally in different industries, and they can get very specific. And the more you go into the run territory, the more advanced the KPIs are, because you get down to unit measure economics. If I said that right, you get down to really you get down to gamification, but your return on investment might taper off. So I guess you have to think of this: what's the low hanging fruit in each of these capabilities? So first you need to be able to measure. You need visibility. That's kind of an obvious place to start. So if you think about the phases, which are kind of an even higher level grouping of the capabilities, inform, visibility, and allocation is all about understanding who's paying for what currently, and giving visibility to different stakeholders and personas as to what's going on. Optimize is all about, now you know what's going on, how do you lower the rate you pay per service? And maybe that's through a reservation or a savings plan, or some other savings vehicle. Or how do you lower the usage? Because the cheapest way to save on the cloud is to turn the resource off so you don't spend anything. But obviously there's an impact there. So that's all about optimize. And then operate is about how do you continuously improve this, but it's also about awareness and education of the organization. And that also never stops. It just keeps going round and round and maturing.
Yeah. So we might maybe get you to comment on that disconnect between technical and financial teams, because we speak a different language, right? And one of the challenges we have as we bring all these people here together and get the right visibility amongst them. And I know that's something that you've often talked about when we do the tagging and the base level, so nomenclature of resources in Azure. So do you want to maybe comment on that making sure that we've got good visibility between engineering and finance people?
Yeah, I think again it comes down to having that common language and some metrics that are meaningful throughout the business. That's understood. And I think in terms of visibility, yes, we've been advocating that since ever. We use cloud, and I guess our customers know that if you're on our CSP, for example, we always made that cost visible and advocate that you make that visible to whoever needs to see that, because I think that if you consciously know what you're spending, and if you have that visibility, then you can make decisions or think about that, where if you don't know, you're not going to care, right? That's just how it is. So I guess, yes, having that terminology and defined throughout the business, and that's understood, and having the visibility of that data set is definitely important.
Stuff. I might move us on. I keep getting tempted into what we're sort of hopefully going to talk about in our second session on FinOps when we revisit the subject. But let us just go on to the focus, which was mentioned in the chat by Sean there. Again, Rodney, I might get you to lead this as subject matter expert and tell us a little bit about focus and what's happening in particular with the Microsoft involvement in this new standard.
Yeah, so if you haven't heard of focus, it's an acronym, FinOps Cost and Usage Specification, and it's not a Microsoft thing. It's initiated. It's an open source project initiated by the FinOps Foundation, which is part of the Linux Foundation, open source, not for profit. So they've recognized, especially in multi-cloud, when you, like most companies, have a footprint in one or more clouds, or two or more clouds, depending on their strategy, their business criticality requirements. But normally it's through acquisition. They acquire a smaller company, then a different cloud. It's easier just to leave it there. So you end up with this mishmash of different clouds. Maybe you have a primary cloud, but you want to get a single pane of glass across everything. And currently, if you think about the evolution of the cloud, when AWS started in 2004, whatever it was, or 2006, they built it a certain way, then Azure built it a certain way, then GCP built it a certain way, then Alibaba, and all the individual vendors developed their own standards and APIs without much collaboration at all, because they were competitors. So now it's time to rebase and say, okay, everyone's doing the same thing. Cloud becomes a commodity. We just want to put something on the cloud, And we want to have a standardized billing mechanism and a standardized approach to managing RIs, understanding rate savings, understanding how we do certain processes and workflows in FinOps, and focus is that. So it's how do you standardize the data sets and the processes so that if all the clouds adhere to that standard, it'll make everyone's life easier to consume that data. So this started about 8 months ago, and there's a working group. So the FinOps Foundation has working groups, which are groups of volunteers around the world, and there's probably about 40 people in the group. I can see Graham Murphy's on the call. He's one of the guys in my team as well in the working group. We meet every single Wednesday with a whole lot of people in our team, and we go through column by column, and it takes many weeks, one column, and we discuss, how do the different clouds do it? What should it be? What are the normalized values? And we try and start with an unbiased opinion. So if we started from scratch, how would you have built this? So we don't want to be influenced by a vendor saying, we did it this way, this is the best way of doing it. It's like, no, it's blank slate. And we've just released version, when I say we, I mean the collective FinOps Foundation have just released the open source project version 1. And now it's up to the vendors to adopt that standard, which is going to be the hard part. However, all three of the big players, AWS, Microsoft, and GCP, are all premier members in the FinOps Foundation, and they committed to making this work. So the various program managers of the cost management teams in those cloud vendors have all committed to adopting Focus. And it only works if everyone does it. So we're educating everyone as to the benefits here.
I'm really excited about that one because I think it makes everything just easier, right? And whoever worked with data and had to normalize a data set, I think knows that. So it can be hard work. So the better data we get from the vendors on that, and the more standardized it is, the easier it will be to consume. And there's also benefits around like just even the reporting side of things, right? If you build a report that is focus aligned, then it will just work with any data source you have. So all that I think provides a huge benefit, and it's a great initiative.
Good stuff. Now, I might just pause there and see if there's any questions, because what I want to talk about next is how we start our journey with FinOps, and I've got some resources we'll share, and then we'll talk about what's up next time as we get toward the end of our 45 minutes. But any questions out there from? I think a couple of things. Just check the chat. Okay, there's just some people helping each other. No particular questions. What I was conscious of when we put this agenda together was that we also talked about how we get started with FinOps, and maybe that's a question again I'll throw to Rodney to start in. But we did want to give you a whole bunch of resources to get you going, and what we want to talk about when we come back in our next session is how we are tackling that and some of the tooling that we use. So both cubesys, we have a small tool around the Azure tagging that we put in the Azure marketplace, but probably more about Rodney's tool and how he raises visibility and how the tool works is where I want to go over the next session. But before that, any general advice from you, Rodney, on getting started while we share some of these resources as well? We'll go over them in a sec.
Yeah, I think it really depends on whether or not you've heard of the FinOps Foundation. If you haven't, that's definitely the first place to go. So finops.org. There's a wealth of information there, and it's excellent. Like, it's the collective combined knowledge of a lot of different people. If you have heard of it, then the next step would be to get involved. So there's a Slack channel with 9,000 people on. I think there's 3,500 companies around the world represented in the FinOps Foundation. 9,000 practitioners. So get involved. Get on the Slack channels. There's a practitioner exam, which is all about this. Get buy-in from your boss. Try and educate upwards in your organization, and spread the word about the need for FinOps.
That's a good idea, and naturally we'll add to those links that we've got up there, the training and certification area, because there's the FinOps certified practitioner, which I think you've done yourself, but there's also ones that are specific to some of the different roles, like certified engineer, and there's courses on personas and all that type of thing. So there's lots and lots of collateral there to help you get educated in FinOps and get started on that journey. We've also put a book up there from Microsoft that have taken some of the FinOps approach, and then twisted it to focus on Azure. So that's a very useful resource if you're Azure focused. Would encourage you also to take part in the State of FinOps survey, which happens every year. Some really valuable input and stats that come back out of that. So the more people that contribute, the better. Have a look at that. Again, we'll share those links for the survey. There's the FinOps assessments. Now, there are all those domains that we briefly touched on that Rodney explained, and you can assess yourself on where you're tracking with that, your maturity level. And again, that's a good aid to get you started on the FinOps journey. And then some background information on that focus standard we talked about. Right.
And I think there was a book tip as well, right, Rodney? If anyone's bored over the Christmas period.
Well, yes.
Oh, you're on mute.
Can you find it? There we go. Yes.
So this is considered the Bible of FinOps. It's by J.R. Storment, who actually founded the FinOps Foundation, and Mike Fuller, who's the CTO based here in Australia. And it's a very good read. It gets updated every year or two. It's constantly evolving, but that's definitely a good place to start. Thanks, Silvan, for reminding me.
Awesome. We'll add that to the list and make sure you've got a link for that, everybody. So as we're wrapping up, and again, more than happy to take questions, and I'll check the chat in a second. What we're aiming to do next time in the next FinOps focused discussion series is really get more into some of how we get into there and the tooling that we're using to do that. So we will then ask Rodney to come and talk about his tool. Maybe I'll get you to give a brief summary in a second, Rodney. And really want to talk about how those capabilities like cost allocation and the education enabled things, how we actually get into the meat of doing them, right, and bringing them into your organization. That'll be our focus. I do really like them, and you can tell that because I've invited Rodney to this session, and because cubesys are partnering with Rodney and his company for our clients, is your tool, Cloud Monitor, which really helps raise the visibility. And I think so that's one of the key things, is the way that your product has been developed is to really provide the right information at the right time to the right people, right? And I think that's the key behind some of the success of FinOps, right? If we can't get that data to the right people to make decisions in a timely manner, then we won't be able to save them money and keep control of cost and show that return on investment. But do you want to give us a quick 30-second intro for next time?
Yeah, sure. So we recognize that the Azure portal, as powerful as it was, has got limitations, mainly because it does too much. It's very powerful, but you have to know what you're looking for, and it's aimed at technical users. So we built a product that's aimed at business users, helps delegate and push the responsibility and accountability down to your business units, and it's got budgeting and forecasting at business unit level. It's got a cost anomaly Teams bot. It's got all the Fabric or Power BI reports for sharing, and it runs at super scale, so it can handle costs up to 50 million a year. It's all based on Synapse deployed to the marketplace. So your costs don't actually leave your tenancy; they all stay inside of your tenancy. But there's a free trial if you want to try it out, and we can see if it helps you. Happy to answer any questions after the chat as well.
Excellent, thank you, Rodney. With that, look, I think the product's great. It's got a lot of potential, and I particularly like the Teams channel and the notifications and things. I think like that. So if we can get the engineers visible of changes in the cost that they've changed overnight, or we've deployed something that's maybe at the wrong size and weren't expecting that cost. Visibility is key to making progress in this space. So with that, maybe I'll just ask Silvan, have you got any last comments to wrap up before we say thank you to everybody?
No, I think I'm definitely excited for the next session when we dive a bit deeper into maybe a bit more practical things and some tooling. Exactly. I think it is obviously part of that, and I think I agree with what you said, Paul. We at cubesys are keen to push that for our clients to the next level and give them more information and make that transparent, because if you don't, then we can't leverage those benefits, right? So that's what we want to achieve for ourselves and for our clients.
Right. Well, with that, I'll say thank you once again to Rodney for your time, right, and to Silvan as well for your input. We'll of course share all these resources, and this video will be available online shortly. Thank you everybody for your time today.
Thanks everyone. Cheers.
Thanks guys.